Thanks very much. Morning, everybody. My name's Andrew Holister, and I'm the Technical Director for Logarithm for the EMEA region. And this morning, I'd really like to talk about discovering hidden threats with user behavior analytics. And if you've been around IT for a while, then you'll know it's an industry that's littered with acronyms. We've got three of them up on the signpost over there: CIO, CISO, CMO. And just thinking about this topic, you know, is this just really another acronym, JAA? Or is there actually something that we need to be concerned about here? And hopefully in the next few minutes, I'll be able to demonstrate to you that user behavioral analytics, or UBA, is a important, if not vital, tool in the security arsenal that you have at your disposal. When we think about the threat landscape today, all of us, of course, have firewalls, we have antiviruses, we've got IDS and proxies, and probably a half a dozen other different types of security technologies. And really, the question is, what's the key difference here? And for me, when I think about user behavior analytics, the key's in the name, really. It's about users. We're talking about human beings who at best are unpredictable. We've just heard a little bit about commitment, employees who really want to get the job done. They find innovative ways of getting around the systems and controls that we put in place. That's what it is to be a human being. And obviously we can't install an upgrade to secure the human being, so we need to take a little bit of a different approach. And that's really what UBA is all about. So there's really kind of three key use cases that user behavior analytics helps us to address. So really these three that are listed up on the screens: the insider threat, compromised accounts, and privileged account abuse. And I think really the key thing here is when we think about these kind of threats, this isn't something that an antivirus can help us with. If we've got an insider who wants to steal data and leak it to our competitors, or they want to embarrass us in some way, an antivirus isn't going to help us stop that user. Typically, they're not using any malware. And a firewall's not going to help us stop that user either. They're already inside our network. They're an insider. By definition, those tools are really not going to help us. So we need a different approach to help us address these kinds of threats. And what I want to do over the next few minutes is just talk about the challenges around some of those threats and how we can use user behavior analytics to try and help us to address those kind of threats within our organizations. So if we start with the insider threats, obviously by definition, the challenges around this, we're starting off with individuals who are trusted users. They're already within our organization. By virtue of that fact, they've got access to data, whether that's intellectual property, whether it's the personally identifiable information of our customers, perhaps it's significant and sensitive financial information. But these users already have access to that information. And finally, because they're a user, it's difficult to coerce a firewall, but a human being, perhaps they might be bribed, they might be persuaded to do something, or they may be coerced into doing something which is harmful to my organization. So how are we going to use, how can we use UBA to help us address these kind of threats? And really, it all comes down to visibility and being able to use analytics in an appropriate way for these kinds of threats. So if we start, for example, in this example I've got up on the screen, the user starts off with a bit of suspicious movement. So, typically my users come into work, they've got their specific role, they log on to their email, perhaps they browse a few websites, maybe go on social media a bit. And this particular user is in our HR department, so they typically access HR resources. They connect to the HR file share. They use the tools that are related to that particular area of the business. Now, on this particular occasion, if my hypothetical user wants to start stealing data for some purpose or another, maybe they're going to start to move around within my organization and start to interact with areas of the business they don't normally interact with. For example, they go off and start browsing the engineering shares, or they go off and start browsing in financial data. And with user behavior analytics, what we can actually do is baseline the normal behavior of the user. This is what they typically come on into work and do. Actually, now I'm seeing some different behaviors from this user. And of course, it may or may not be, at this point, the time to send in the cavalry. You know, maybe they've got assigned a new job role, maybe they've got a specific project that's causing them to change the behavior within the environment. But we're able to raise a flag and say, hey, this is something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, some behavior we haven't seen before from this particular user. Now, if they're actually have got bad intent, you know, what we're likely to see next is them perhaps directly accessing some sensitive material. Perhaps they actually go and open up some financial spreadsheets. Perhaps they go and access some financial back-end systems that they've never accessed before. And then obviously the final step is to actually begin to take that data, perhaps copy it off to a USB stick, put it up on Dropbox or something like that. And really the key here is that we've got the technology and the baseline of understanding of what this user normally does so that we can take action in an appropriate timescale. And what we don't want to be do is kind of closing the door when the horse has bolted or my data's already out on the internet and I can find out who did it. I actually want to get the ability to stop the user in their tracks and prevent my organization being impacted. And of course, we see this kind of thing spread all over the news on a day-to-day basis. Let's have a look at the next use case, compromised accounts. And again, really the challenge here is, again, it's not going to help us having a firewall or other types of preventative technology. Accounts exist within our environment. They enable our users to do their job. And if you read the industry reports, depending on the particular type, you might see anything up to 75% of breaches within organizations actually start out with a compromised account. So this is a very significant area that we can focus in on. And really the question here is, who is the user? This is an account that's accessible and being used in my environment. It's a valid account. It's perhaps been created by our IT department. But who's actually the person? How do we identify who is it that's actually sitting behind that account and carrying out the actions? And again, what's the normal behavior for this particular account? Typically, this account is used for email. It's used for web browsing. It's not typically used to go off and access different things. And the final point here is, you know, was this the real user doing it? Was the person who owns that account carrying out this activity? Or was it actually some malware that's got in and is using those credentials to achieve some other aims? And these are all things that user behavior analytics is really able to help us address and understand and get visibility of. And, you know, really around this space, this is all about visibility into what's really going on within my environment and being able to surface that activity in a time frame that helps us to address it before it becomes a proper breach. So again, when we think about the kill chain in connection with compromised accounts, there's a number of different elements here. And again, a very large majority of these kinds of breaches actually begin with a spear phishing email. So an email that's sent to a specific individual to try and encourage them to click on an attachment that actually turns out to be malware. And again, what we're really looking at here is being able to use this aspect of what's going on in the network, understand what our users are doing. This user doesn't normally start up lots of processes. This user doesn't normally go off and try to connect to lots of other workstations in the environment. That's not normal for this particular individual. And again, with access to sensitive data, this user doesn't normally go around trying to find out how far their account privileges extend. And all of these kind of activities leave footprints in the environment that with UBA, we can identify those and understand when some unusual behavior is starting to happen. Okay, and the final of our three, privileged account abuse. And again, what we're talking about here, very highly trusted users in our environment. Typically, these will be our domain administrators or perhaps individuals with highly privileged access to financial systems or something of that nature. These are people that we trust with those kind of credentials. And obviously, by definition, these credentials are very highly privileged. And added to that, the individuals with these kind of accounts have both the knowledge and the means to do damage to our environment should they choose to do so. And again, just to give one or two examples here, perhaps these credentials are being used in an inappropriate way. Again, my firewall, my antivirus isn't going to help me with that. I need analytics to help me surface this kind of activity and pull that out from the noise in my environment. We may have an administrator who's a little bit more savvy and knows that perhaps we're monitoring what's going on in the environment, and perhaps they use their highly privileged account to go off and create another account with which they try to steal some data, or they wreak some sort of havoc in the environment, delete that account, and then they hope that it can't be traced back to them. And again, user behavior analytics gives us the ability to dig into that kind of activity and behavior and really to be able to surface it so we can take some action in response. I think one of the kind of really key things here, IT is kind of full of silver bullet solutions, and this is kind of going to solve all your problems. And when we think about something like UBA, this, in common with many other kind of prevention and detection technologies, it's not something that we should use in isolation. As UBA user behavior is really one element of all the different types of behavior we see in our environment. And obviously we've got users, we've got our network, we've got the endpoints within our environment, and we've got all kinds of contexts that sit around the activities that are going on within our environment. And UBA is one of those particular attributes. And if we can take the behavior of the individual user, what they're doing within that environment, and then we can link that together with perhaps some unusual activity on the endpoint that user's using. We can link that together with some unusual activity in the network, unusual volumes of traffic, and really get a broad and deep visibility across the organization about what's really going on here. Then that will enable us to get quicker detection of these kind of events and more quickly to respond, so we can actually protect our organization from harm. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found that interesting. We'll be around to take questions afterwards.